probably a couple of days away from the start of the second national signing period for high school football seniors. And in his line of work, this is crunch time, but he's taking a little time to join us this morning. We appreciate it, Rodney. Good to talk to you.
What's going on? Y'all been busy this morning?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know, as I said, you are extremely busy, but it's all going to come together here in a couple of days for Alabama as they try to close out this 2018 recruiting class. 15 signees in the early period back in December, probably 7 to 8 more on Wednesday. Anything happening over the weekend with visits? What are some late news and notes? Anything that you can pass along to us that's newsworthy at this point?
Well, really, there's nothing hard news. Again, I put out a little piece earlier last week and saying, look, don't expect any hard news until probably maybe even signing day, Gary. There's going to be a lot of speculation, of course, on some of these top guys. Alabama's in on several with 8 spots to fill. Nothing really in terms of hard news, but certainly a lot of speculation as we start to move forward. Again, most of these guys, if not all of them, will announce on signing day.
Yeah, and you pointed that out in your piece last week, and I thought it was well written. Not only did you bring your readers and your customers up to speed on who Alabama was recruiting, but I think you pointed out, Rodney, and fairly so, that it's not like Alabama just snaps their fingers now and says, Bobby Brown, come on down, Jalen Waddle, come on down, Ross, come on down, Patrick Surtain, come on down. There are other teams fighting to sign these young men, too. And I think one thing about the early period, you get that out of the way, but whatever pocket of recruits are left, there's that much more attention focused on them in the second signing period. And it's a battle.
Oh. Yeah, they got a little angry with me because I didn't say everyone was locked up, stone cold locks for Alabama. But the fact is, these other schools are recruiting as hard as Alabama is. And as you start to move towards the stretch run, like you said, Gary, I think with the less number of prospects, all of a sudden their value kind of goes up a little bit, even though these guys now, the ones Alabama's recruiting, extremely high-profile kids. And, when you look at it right now, and it's really tough to get a read on because everybody kind of has a different view. You've got different websites that kind of throwing stuff out there, and it makes it difficult to kind of get a read on. But, from the things I pick up on, I still think when all is said and done, Alabama's going to finish very strong. Right now, I guess if you look at where they're rated, number 6, I guess overall in the composite rankings of 24/7. So I think with that in mind, I would think that Alabama has a really good shot. Now, if everything went perfectly, I still think they could challenge for the number 1 spot. But again, I'm talking everything would have to go just perfectly. But I do think they've got a reasonable shot at number 2, 3, 4, somewhere in there. I could see that happening.
Let's talk about some of the key targets left, and I'll just do it by position, and you can then mention the guys that Alabama is recruiting there, and what do you think the possibilities are of them getting, one or more of those players. Let's start with the inside linebacker position, because I know that Alabama wants an inside linebacker in this class. They're involved with several. How do you see that playing out?
Well, first of all, I thought Quay Walker would decommit from Alabama for a long time. I mean, that's pretty much been the feel. And I still think that even though he's committed, he'll end up elsewhere, whether it's Tennessee or Georgia or maybe even Auburn has an outside shot right now. We'll see what happens. Jalen Moody from Conway, South Carolina, was in this weekend, a linebacker that's not very highly regarded in terms of the star system, but has really been kind of evaluated thoroughly by the likes of John Chavis and others, Alabama as well. And, he's a guy that's probably better than whatever his ranking is, which, again, is a 2 or 3 star. He visited Alabama this weekend. But the guy I would keep an eye on possibly that could be really interesting is J.J. Peterson, who was once a very strong Alabama lean. Of course, when Jeremy Pruitt went to Tennessee, that changed things. He committed to Tennessee sight unseen without even visiting. But Alabama has really stayed with him. Nick Saban had a great visit with him the middle part of last week. And I think J.J.'s really thinking hard about Alabama. So, we'll see what happens there. I can tell you that would be a huge pickup because of Alabama's needs at the inside backer spot and because of the quality player that J.J. Peterson is.
What about the Jackson, the linebacker out of Texas? You feel like that ship kind of sailed?
I've kind of thought that for a while. I know a lot of people have tried to say that, it's still – and you know what? You never can tell what might happen, so I don't want to say that it won't happen. But I've kind of felt for at least 3 weeks to a month that probably Vernon Jackson would end up elsewhere.
All right, let's go from the linebacker position to the defensive line. Obviously, Bobby Brown, Malik Ingram are targets. How do you think this position plays out on signing day for Alabama?
Well, yeah, Bobby Brown from Arlington, Texas, been committed for a while, was originally committed to Texas A&M for a couple of months before flipping to Alabama in December. Visited, made an unofficial visit to Alabama back on the parade weekend, made an unofficial this past weekend to Texas A&M, which is a concern if you're an Alabama fan. Bobby, he's kind of been one of those guys back and forth and hard to get a read on what he might do. I don't even think Texas A&M knows what he would do. Even though he was there this weekend. But listen, we'll have to just let this one play out with Bobby Brown, see where he ends up signing. I think Alabama's in great position with Malik Langham out of Huntsville Lee, visited Auburn this past weekend. And then the guy I would really kind of keep an eye on is Glenn Beal. I think he may be one of the more interesting prospects in this group. He is from River Ridge, Louisiana. He's a tight end primarily in high school, but if you look at his clips at defensive end, you can see why a lot of schools think he's got a really bright future at that position. I know that Alabama's recruited him hard. He visited here a couple of weeks ago. I do think that he favors Alabama quite a bit right now. Texas A&M's in there. Tennessee is really strong in there, Jeremy Pruitt. So, we'll see what happens. But he would be a guy that I would keep an eye on because I think he could be an interesting player, whether it's a tight end or defensive end.
Yeah, you said correctly, Malik Langham. I think I said Malik Ingram. But those are three really good players. Let me ask you this, Rod. Would Alabama take all three of those guys if they wanted to sign?
Well, again, I think there's so many moving parts right now that scenario is possible. I don't think that that's out of the question. Again, moving parts. What happens with Nicholas Pettit-Freer on the offensive line? What happens in the secondary? What happens at wide receiver? I think all of those things, depending on what happens there, you could see Alabama take all three. But for me to sit here and say exactly that, it will happen, I just at this point, it's too early for me to say.
Yeah, and we'll wrap up this segment with our as we stay on defense, and then the next segment we'll get into the offensive side of the ball. But the secondary, you talk about moving parts now. There are a lot of highly rated guys. I'm talking about 4- and 5-star players that are still available, and Alabama's involved with a lot of them. And can't sign them all, but certainly it looks as though Alabama's going to sign at least 2 secondary members, if not 3. There's a lot of big names left out there, Rodney, and Alabama seems to be involved with most of them.
Well, I tell you, Eddie Smith out of Slidell, Louisiana, he's a guy that's extremely underrated. Remember a few years ago when they signed Eddie Jackson, he was a 3-star player. You could look at his tape, and we said this on Tighter Insider TV. This guy's not a 3-star player. He's a 5-star player, talking about Eddie Jackson. I look at Eddie Smith kind of a similar way. I think he's a great player, prospect. I think he's greatly underrated. I think Alabama's in excellent position with him as a corner. Now the question becomes, what about Patrick Surtain? LSU people have thought for a long time that he was a strong lean to them. I think Alabama's done a tremendous job recruiting him all along. Gary, this almost strikes me as, and I wonder is this another kind of Dylan Moses type recruitment, meaning that, LSU thought they had him locked up, but Alabama never gave up, continued to chip away, and then in the end, Alabama won. And as I look at Patrick Surtain, I won't be surprised if he ends up picking Alabama. Then there's Tyson Campbell, his teammate, great cornerback as well. Georgia's been considered the strong leader. Miami's been in there. Alabama's recruited him really hard. Joe Panunzio's done a great job on both Campbell and Surtain. We'll see what happens with Campbell. I think Alabama still has a shot, but if I had to give the edge right now, I would still think Georgia may be the team.
Going to be interesting, as you said. It's a little different this year, having had the December signing period, but the players that are left now, the focus is on a lot less guys. It means the intensity of the recruitment is a lot heavier. The offensive side of the ball, recruiting-wise, let's start at quarterback, because a lot of buzz about this kid that Alabama was recruiting to some extent, had been committed to Princeton, and then, of course, the headline writers had a field day with Alabama loses recruit to Princeton. Why don't you tell us exactly what went down there, Rodney?
Well, of course, Brevin White's quarterback from Lancaster, California, that you're referring to, he's been committed to. And he's a four-star player. He had offers. And Alabama gave him an offer. There's a difference between, I guess, an offer and a committable offer. I don't really like to, say that somebody has a committable offer or doesn't have. That's kind of hard to judge sometimes. But, here's the deal, Gary. I think Alabama probably made the decision a week, maybe 10 days ago, whatever it was, that they probably weren't going to sign a quarterback in this class in terms of a high school 2018 quarterback. So I think that probably that's why Brevin White stuck with Princeton. And I do think a lot of people said, well, okay, Alabama's missed out on Brevin White, so where does that leave them with the Brock Purdy, the quarterback from Gilbert, Arizona? And, of course, now it was reported last night that he had eliminated, quote-unquote, Alabama. Again, we go back to the point is I think Alabama probably feels like in these 8 spots, they want to fill those with other guys at other positions of need right now. So the bottom line is I really don't think Alabama was pushing hard down the stretch here for a quarterback.
And I think that's
among the high school kids, let me say. Among the high school kids.
That being a quarterback might not come in at another point in time, but and I've said it for the record, I'm in agreement with that. I think that the numbers are just too tight. There's a big quarterback class coming up in 2019. I think this is the right move for Alabama. Of course, it doesn't matter what I think, but I do agree with it. But no, I'm glad you cleared that up. Again, nothing against these young men, and they're highly recruited players, but just because you're recruiting somebody and at some point there's an offer out there, it doesn't mean that they can commit to you. And I think that's what happened more than anything else. I'm with you. I think Alabama just moved on. All right, the wide receivers. And we know that Ross and Waddle or Waddell, depending on how you pronounce his name, are the two big targets there for Alabama. They'd like to sign both of those guys, Rodney, and at least get one of them for sure. What's that looking like on the wide receiver recruiting front?
Well, I think that's the goal. Both of those two guys, they're the focus. Jalen Waddle out of Houston, Texas area, Bel Air, Texas. He is I've said it before, probably the most dynamic player in the country when it comes to having the ball in his hands. He can return punts, kicks, whatever it is. Great receiver. Has a little bit of David Palmer in him. Has really excellent speed, too. So I like him a lot. I think Alabama's in great shape with him. Of course, Texas A&M making a strong push. They're not going to go away. So, I think it's probably a little bit too early to call. I wouldn't want to call it, but I do think Alabama's in a comfortable position. Justin Ross out of Phoenix City Central would give Alabama a big guy at 6'3", 6'4", great height. So I look at him, and I think Alabama's in excellent position. Clemson and Auburn in there fighting as well. So I feel really good about those two right now, Gary. Jacob Copeland is still in the mix out of Pensacola, Escambia. He's a guy that's really an excellent athlete, could play wide receiver, could actually play in the secondary. But again, I think right now, if I had to put out the tighter insider crystal ball, it would probably include Justin Ross and Jalen Waddle.
Wow, that would be great news for Alabama if that holds true. Offensive line, and you mentioned him in the first segment, it looks like it's pretty much whether it's Petit Ferrer, again, one of these are Pettit Ferrer, but he seems to be the one option at offensive tackle. It looks like Alabama will sign him or not sign an offensive lineman at all in this late period. Am I right there, Rod?
That would be, yes, I think so, even though Panay Sewell has been in the mix out of Utah. But, I think this guy's, he may be the most difficult to read. Florida thinks they've got him. They think because they're close to home, and if you listen to their people, their academics are on such a higher level than Alabama's, whether they are or not. I mean, the kid wants to major in engineering, but so they think that because he's 90 miles from their campus and because they're so superior academically, that they get him. I'm not really sure that Pettit Career views it that way. I think Dean Carr over at the engineering school at Alabama certainly impressed both Nicholas and his mother when they were here. So I think that they hold Alabama in high regard, both academically and athletically. We'll see what happens. Ohio State is in the mix. Notre Dame's in the mix. But listen, I do think that Alabama's in great shape in terms of having a shot at this guy. I don't think that it's like some people have said that he's really not considering Alabama very strongly. I think he is very interested in Alabama.
And, of course, running back, Alabama signed one in the early period. Doesn't seem to be much activity there at that position at all for this late signing period, is there, Rodney?
I don't see it. Jerome Ford, signed early. He's a versatile kid out of Seffner Armwood, Florida. Guy that could, is a versatile player, kind of in the Kenyon Drake mold. So I think that would be it.
And tied in pretty much the same story there.
Well, here's the deal. I mentioned Glenn Beal earlier, and he's such a versatile kid. If you signed him, he's a tight end in high school at River Ridge, John Curtis. But also, again, I think his greatest potential is at defensive end. But, Gary, he's good enough as a tight end. I mean, he's just that versatile.